All right, good afternoon. I have quite a lot of stuff for you today. Some of it may actually be of interest to you. All right, just start first. Well, let Mr. Hatter take his jacket off, sunglasses off, sit down. All right. All right, starting off on the humanitarian end, our colleagues on the ground in Ukraine tell us that needs in Ukraine are growing and spreading by the hour. They warn that while the scale and scope of displacement is not yet clear, we do expect that more than 10 million people may flee their homes if violence continues, including 4 million people who may cross borders to neighboring countries. In a statement, the Humanitarian Coordinator, Osnat Lubrani, reiterated the message that we are committed to scaling up our support for people across Ukraine, particularly women, children, elderly, and those with disabilities who desperately need relief and protection as well as shelter. While we've relocated some of our essential staff outside of Kiev so that we can keep delivering assistance with the minimum of disruption, at the same time, some of our humanitarian staff are remaining in the capital of Ukraine. Our colleagues our colleagues in Ukraine have mobilized staff and supplies, both to help people fleeing across borders for safety and to support those inside the country. And also want to add that we do have staff as well is in the eastern part of the Ukraine along the line of contact. And our humanitarian colleagues are stressing that, of course, to scale up operations, we need safe, unimpeded access to all conflict areas. And of course, you will have seen the appeal by Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, for humanitarian corridors. I also want to mention that according to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, between 4 a.m. on February 24th, when the Russian Federation's military actions against Ukraine started, and midnight on March 2nd, midnight local time, our Ukraine Human Rights Office recorded 802 civilian casualties in Ukraine. That's 249 people killed and 553 injured. And the UN human rights monitors are continuing to operate across the country to the full extent of their capacity. Just want to mention something, because we have seen some reports of basically outright racism in this context, and I want to say that the Secretary General is shocked by the numerous reports of racism, harassment, and discrimination that people of different races have been subjected to as they try to leave Ukraine, as well as in neighboring countries as they seek refuge from the conflict. The Secretary General very much appreciates the generosity of those governments bordering Ukraine. He calls on all governments in the region to crack down on any manifestation of racism and xenophobia. It is vital that they ensure that all people, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or culture, are afforded the same treatment and protection. Just a quick note that you may have seen that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Filippo Grandi, who is currently in the region, said that in just 7 days, 1 million people have now fled Ukraine, uprooted by what he calls the senseless war. And that is about over 2% of the population of the country, as we are told. He noted that hour by hour, minute by minute, more people are fleeing the terrifying reality of violence, and that countless people have been displaced inside Ukraine as well. And also in a statement, the International Organization for Migration Director General, Antonio Vitorino, said that he is alarmed by verified, credible reports of discrimination, violence, and xenophobia against third country nationals attempting to flee the country. He stressed that neighboring states need to ensure that all those fleeing Ukraine are granted unhindered access to territory, regardless of status, and in accordance with international law. Also speaking on Ukraine today was the High Commissioner for Human Rights as she spoke in Geneva during the urgent debate organizing the Council on Human Rights Council on Ukraine. She said that the Russian Federation's military attack on Ukraine opened a new and dangerous chapter in world history, noting that the attack is generating massive impact on the human rights of millions of people across Ukraine, and that elevated threats of nuclear weapons underline the gravity of risks to all humanity. Quick update from Moldova. The UNHCR there, the UNHCR team in Moldova received its first humanitarian airlift for refugees fleeing Ukraine. About a quarter of the 8,000 thermal blankets received went to the border crossing point in South Moldova, where distribution begun to refugee families with children and other vulnerable people. Thousands of people were waiting for entry to the country outside under freezing temperature and snow. Our colleagues said that more support is on the way, including sleeping bags, more blankets, tents, hygiene, baby kits, solar lamps, and other necessary relief items. Over 136,000 refugees have entered Moldova so far, according to UNHCR, and we're, of course, continuing to support the needs of women and children with UNICEF and UFPA providing water, health, and hygiene kits. The Secretary General this morning took part virtually in the opening session of the 4th Summit of the Caribbean Community and Central American Integration System, otherwise known as CARICOM-SICA, which is taking place in Belize. He spoke live via video link and told leaders at the summit that today's challenges demand solidarity, and now is the time for action across 4 fronts. These are achieving vaccine equity, reforming the global financial system, taking climate action, and building peace and security across the region. The Secretary General added he's particularly grateful to the region for its steadfast advocacy for the people of Haiti, where nearly 5 million people need humanitarian assistance. While we respond to the immediate needs, we will continue encouraging and supporting Haitian-led solutions to end the political crisis, craft new constitution, and plan timely elections in a secure and peaceful environment. He said, we've shared those remarks with you. And the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed is on her way back to New York this evening after wrapping up her travels to Rwanda. This morning, she spoke at the opening of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. She told delegates that the 2030 Agenda and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, together with the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, remain our blueprints to successfully confront challenges we face. She laid out 5 key priorities for the way forward: end the acute phase of the pandemic, build resilience against the next outbreak, scale up and speed investment in the protection of people and ecosystems at the front line of climate change, supercharge just transition in energy, food systems, and digital connectivity, and to recover the huge learning losses of the pandemic by advancing education and lifelong learning to accelerate gender equality and economic transformation. She also met President Kagame of Rwanda before coming back here. And an update on the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia, where in the northern part of the country remains extremely concerning for our humanitarian colleagues. In the Afar region, people continue to be displaced by ongoing fighting, adding to growing needs. During the past week, some 18,000 people received food assistance in areas affected by the conflict, and in some health services, water, trucking, and household items have been provided to those recently displaced. But there's still a need to scale up assistance. In the Tigray region, deliveries of aid and fuel by road through Afar remain suspended. From the 17th to the 23rd of February, no distribution of food aid was reported, as supplies and fuel have nearly run out. Some limited aid supplies continue to be flown into Tigray. During the past week, nutrition supplies to treat severe acute malnutrition in young children were flown in. That's the first time such a shipment arrived since mid-December. Overall, more than 7 million people have been assisted in the current round of food distribution, which began late December. Turning to Somalia, the resident humanitarian coordinator there, Adam Abdelmullah, expressed his concern about the impact on civilians of recent hostilities in Dinsor in southwest state. Over 17,400 people, many of them women and children, have been forced to flee their homes in the last 3 weeks. Our humanitarian colleagues report that those impacted by violence are also facing the consequences of an ongoing drought emergency in this area. In Southwest State, almost 136,000 people are facing emergency levels of food insecurity. The Humanitarian Response Plan, which seeks nearly $1.5 billion to assist 5.5 million people of the most vulnerable, is only 3.3% funded. And in a statement we issued last night, the Secretary General expressed his concern at the situation ongoing situation in Libya, which he's following very closely. Especially, it reports that the March 1st vote in the Libyan House of Representatives fell short of the expected standards of transparency and procedures and included acts of intimidation prior to the session. The Secretary General reiterates the importance of preserving the unity and the hard-won stability achieved since the signing of the Libyan ceasefire agreement in October of 2020. He stressed the need to fulfill the aspirations of more than 2.8 Libyans who registered to vote. And they wanted to choose their leader through credible, transparent, and inclusive elections on the basis of sound and legal framework. The special advisor to the Secretary General, Stephane Williams, remains in touch, is in Tripoli and remains in touch with the parties. She intends to invite as soon as possible a joint meeting of the House of Representatives and the High State Council to come together in order to establish a consensual constitutional basis that would lead to national elections as soon as possible. Moving on to Asia, a quick update from Myanmar, where in the face of increasing humanitarian needs, the World Food Programme is substantially scaling up its assistance with plans to target at least 4 million people across the country. This is despite immense challenges in security, humanitarian access, funding, and the pandemic. Currently, 1 out of 4 people now face food insecurity in the country. In Yangon and Mandalay, Myanmar's biggest cities, WFP is completing new rounds of food and nutritional assistance, reaching up to 1.7 million vulnerable people. WFP has also delivered life-saving food to 57,000 newly displaced people last year in 7 states and regions through the country. This is in addition to the regular food and cash distribution for 360,000 men, women, and children in the border states of Rakhine, Kachin, and northern Shan. Quick COVID update from Papua New Guinea, where our team there continues to support the authorities as country experiences a 4th wave of transmission. The country has reported to WHO 41,000 infections, including 638 deaths. Authorities have received nearly 1.3 million COVID vaccines, all of the nearly 300,000 landed, which nearly 300,000 of that 1.3 million got to Papua New Guinea via COVAX. We thank donors, which include Australia, China, New Zealand, and the United States for donating those vaccines. Our team is working to boost the uptake. To date, less than 5% of the population 18 and above have been fully vaccinated, and only 1/3 of health workers have been fully vaccinated. Through EU and UN spotlight initiatives, we are also, and local authorities, we are promoting women and girls' rights and helping escape violence, a key challenge during this pandemic. Today is World Wildlife Day. This year's theme is recovering key species for ecosystem restoration as a way to draw attention on the conservation status of some of the most critically endangered species. In his message, the Secretary General said all around the world, wildlife is in peril, 1/4 of species facing the threat of extinction, in large part because we've destroyed nearly half of the ecosystems in which they live. A quick note to say that the World Food Programme is a new initiative in partnership with its Goodwill Ambassador, Abel Tesfaye, better known to most of you as The Weeknd. The WFP is launching a new fund that will direct support for hunger emergency throughout the world with a specific focus on Ethiopia, where an estimated 9.4 million people require urgent humanitarian and food assistance. The Weeknd has made an initial donation of $500,000 to the fund. He's also donating $1 from each ticket sold in his upcoming North American tour. Go buy some tickets. And lastly, we wish a very happy birthday, 50th birthday, To our friends at UNEP, the UN Environment Program in Nairobi, it was founded in 1972 following the UN Conference on Human Environment and was conceived to monitor the state of the environment. And no better birthday gift than the Plastics Treaty the Assembly adopted. Edith.
Thank you, Steph. A couple of questions. First, can you tell us what the Secretary General's immediate plans are to implement the General Assembly resolution adopted yesterday? He talked about the need for action.
Yeah, I mean, the Secretary General will implement the resolution as directed by him through the operative paragraph. I think there's a request for the Emergency Humanitarian Coordinator to report back. He will do that. He continues to be on the phone with various PRs and others in trying to deal with the situation.
No calls to any of the major leaders?
Nothing to report to you at this point.
Okay, my second question is a follow-up on Libya. You said that Stephanie Williams plans to invite the House of Deputies and the High State Council together to try and resolve this as soon as possible. What does as soon as possible mean? Are we talking about months? Are we talking about days? Are we talking about weeks?
We'd like to see it happen as quickly as possible. But when you invite people to an event, it also depends on the guests you've invited to agree on a time to show up together. We think it's extremely important that all Libyan leaders keep in mind the need not to go backwards. I think a few weeks ago we talked about the humanitarian situation in Libya, which was improving. We want to keep building on those gains. We want to build on the fact that almost 3 million people registered to vote. There's been a lot of positive movement for the Libyan people, and I think it's important that Libyan leaders avoid any rhetoric that would push us backwards.
Has there been any reaction yet? Has these invitations gone out to?
Well, I mean, they yes. I mean, I've announced it publicly. I very much assume that.
And has there been any reaction from either side?
I think we will wait to announce the meeting, Madam.
Thanks, Steph. A couple things on Ukraine. First, just clarification. Did you say 249 dead?
If you don't listen to what I say, yes,
I believe that's what I heard.
Yes, I think it was 240.
Because yesterday morning, the Ukrainian officials were saying 2,000.
I mean,
do you know
listen,
the reason for the discrepancy?
People talk about the fog of war. I can only go by the data that our human rights colleagues feel that they have verified, they have double-checked, they've used the right sources. So I can only be the source of UN data. Others will have other numbers.
Okay. President Putin has suggested that Ukraine is using civilian, almost human shields, that the civilians are being placed near military targets and so on. Has the UN seen any evidence of that?
We have not seen any evidence of that happening.
And finally, you mentioned that the Secretary General hasn't had contact with the leaders recently. Given more weapons are pouring into the area and the hardening of sides here, is he concerned that diplomatic efforts, diplomacy is dead?
Look,
here?
I mean, we do not believe diplomacy is dead. Let's be clear. I think there have been meetings ongoing today between Russian and Ukrainian delegations on the border post in Belarus. Other discussions are being had. The Secretary General is in touch with key interlocutors here. What we are concerned about is the continuing suffering of people in Ukraine, the continued use of heavy weapons in attacks against Ukrainian cities. This is extremely concerning to the Secretary General. He would like this to stop. I mean, I think we all can only be moved by what we've seen. Beno and then Betul.
Thank you. So what I asked you before, the head of the Conservative Party in the parliament in Europe, in Strasbourg, called for the SG to hold direct talks with Vladimir Putin. What is your comment?
No, the Secretary General has been very clear that his good offices are always available. As you know, he's spoken to leadership in Ukraine. He's spoken to senior leaders in Russia and in other countries. His good offices remain available.
And just the very first note you read, can you tell me what the source was? Because I got a call and my record was off. Sorry for that.
Would you like a private reading?
No, I'm sorry.
No, sorry. It was when I talked about the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, it was our humanitarian colleagues on the ground. What I was stressing is that some have been relocated outside of Kiev for not only for their safety, but also so we can work and distribute and plan better. And then others have remained in Kiev to continue to work alongside the Ukrainians who've remained in Kiev, right? And we also have other people who remain in eastern Ukraine along the line of contact. Betul.
Thank you, Stephane. A couple of questions, but can you clarify this more than 10 million people you said might be internally displaced or might leave the country? And also, I've got a couple of questions. President Macron today warned that the worst is yet to come in Ukraine after a phone call with President Putin. Does the UN share the same concerns? And President Zelensky accused Russia of blocking humanitarian aid. Is the UN having any difficulties in terms of providing aid to Ukrainians?
Obviously, on the first, your second part, we've heard reports. First of all, it's very important. Let me just put it this way: that in any conflict, everyone involved in the conflict support and help with the distribution of humanitarian aid. I mean, that's why this Dr. Tedros clearly called for humanitarian corridors. We also saw an announcement by the Russian Defense Ministry that it had created an interagency coordination center on humanitarian response in Ukraine. We, of course, look forward to hearing more about this report initiative. And it's important for all the parties to have the capacity to liaise with the humanitarian system in Ukraine with a view of enabling safe delivery of humanitarian assistance in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law. We've already been liaising with the Russian Ministry of Defense to ensure that they are aware, and they were aware of the movements of UN convoys within Ukraine. So we're in touch with the Russian Ministry of Defense, also obviously with the Ukrainian authorities. Whenever you operate in a conflict zone, it is important that you have lines, open lines, with everyone involved to ensure the safety of civilians, to ensure the safety of humanitarian staff and humanitarian goods. I mean, listen, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think no one here is going to say that things are going in the right direction, right? What we want to see is a surge in diplomatic contacts, right? We want to see a stop to these attacks on Ukrainian cities with heavy weapons. We want to see an end to this conflict. Oh, sorry. What I said, maybe I should read more slowly. Sorry. We expect that more than 10 million people may flee their homes if violence continues, including 4 million people who may cross the borders to neighboring countries. So this is a projection. Of course, as you know, 1 million have already been been forced to flee Ukraine to seek refuge in neighboring states. Yep.
Hi, Stephane. Next time you can call me Edward. I have a couple of questions. First, a follow-up with Edith's question. Yesterday, the General Assembly passed the resolution, have a lot of demands and calls, but exactly how much power does this resolution has? And another thing is, what else, except for the humanitarian front, can UN do with that resolution?
Well, first of all, I think part of that question will be directed to Paulina.
I asked Paulina,
I know, but
actually.
she'll be back. Listen, I would refer you to the charter, right, and the authority and powers of each legislative body in this organization. You know, when we talk about the UN, I think we have to talk about we have to clarify which UN we are talking about. There's the UN of the legislative bodies. We saw the results in the General Assembly. We saw the result in the Security Council. While that happens, the staff that the Secretary General leads is working with the aim of providing humanitarian aid and support to people inside Ukraine, to people outside Ukraine. But let's face it, those are Band-Aids, right? What we need is for those directly involved in the conflict to decide to end that conflict through negotiations and through diplomatic contacts.
And second question, yesterday during the explanation of vote, ambassador to the UN from Russia, Nebenzia, said military hardware, multiple rockets launchers and artillery equipment are set up in the residential areas. And yesterday he said he would bring such examples to the notice of the UN leadership. Has the Secretary General received it? Has he received it?
I don't know if he has. I can check. I mean, I saw the SG not too long ago. I will check.
But if it's true, should it be condemned or?
Listen, we're all speaking up against this conflict. That we are calling for the Russian military operations to stop. I think the Secretary General was very clear on that since the beginning. Obviously, let me wait and see what we've received.
And another technical issue I want to ask. We saw several reports that Ukrainian's National Guard has handed over 18,000 submachine guns and ammunitions to people to protect Kiev and other cities. I just want to know from you or maybe the UN, these kinds of movement. I mean, those people who have the guns, should they be considered civilians or should they be considered as militants? Because
it's a valid question. Frankly, I don't have the legal degrees or legal know-how to, but I understand your question. Obviously, every country has the right to defend its territorial integrity. Errol, and then we'll move south.
Thank you, Steph. Just to clarify one thing, there is a letter sent to Secretary General Guterres by Bosnian Serb member of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, in which he is advising Secretary General that the current ambassador of Bosnia doesn't have a full authority to vote in favor of the resolution, because Bosnia indeed has voted in favor. And just for the record, there is actually 2/3 of the presidency gave support of the Bosnian ambassador here. But what does the Secretary General say for that letter? It's also sent through the Russian mission to the UN.
I'm not aware we've received the letter, but what I can tell you, if there's an issue with the representation or the credentials, that's an issue for member states to decide through the Credentials Committee. This is not an issue for the Secretary General to get involved in.
It's not an issue of credentials at all.
No,
it's
but
rather political.
But that's not an issue for the Secretary General to get involved in.
But did he receive the letter?
I can check if he received
Can you please?
the letter. Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. Just to follow up on the negotiation issue, I mean, the Secretary General appointed an envoy to Ukraine. Where is he, and what is he doing?
He appointed a coordinator, right? This is somebody to... words matter here. He is someone who is there to oversee the coordination of the UN's activities in Ukraine, which includes at this point, really the humanitarian activities. That's his. He is not a political envoy. He is currently, as of this morning, he was in Poland. He and his team are making their way into Western Ukraine very soon.
And was he already in Ukraine, or is he going to go?
No, he was
Poland.
making his way
Okay,
to
so
Ukraine via.
Poland.
He's in Krakow, and then he's making his way to Ukraine.
And the negotiation that's happening between the Russians and the Ukrainians, are you in any way involved or
No.
getting reports or?
I mean, we rely on you and your colleagues to give us the reports. Ms. Fasulo, and then we'll go to Ray.
My question, I'd like to go back to what you discussed earlier about the xenophobia, racism occurring at the borders. I just wanted to get a sense, some details, get a sense of how prevalent a problem this is and where it's occurring.
Look,
Are we talking about dozens of people, hundreds, thousands? And overall, if you know how many foreigners, so to speak, what's the universe of people?
Yeah,
that
I
could be
don't have the
affected?
number of foreigners. What I can tell you is that our colleagues at the agencies working in the area have received credible and verified information from partners and humanitarians present on both sides of the border, have documented signs of abuse on several third country nationals arriving in neighboring countries, also documented acts of xenophobia based on people's race, nationality in several border cities. We've also seen the overwhelming testimonies shared in traditional media, on social media, from people who have been subject to discrimination, including not limited to people from Africa, European citizens of African descent as well, people from the Middle East and Asia. They've reported having faced discrimination on their journey. I think there are a few things here to note. One is that there has been amazing generosity from the border countries, right, of Ukraine, who have opened up their borders and allowed for protection. This issue has been raised with the leadership in a number of these countries who've all committed to investigating it and to ensure it doesn't happen. And we are not saying in any way, shape, or form that it is sanctioned by those governments. On the contrary, I think they're all very aware of the problem. We've also seen and welcomed the statements from the Ukrainian foreign minister, who has also condemned these acts and ensured that Ukraine will treat everyone equally. And I saw also in a tweet from the Ukrainian foreign minister that they had set up a special hotline for third country nationals who feel they are left stranded, they're not getting the help that they need. Ray, and then Celia.
Merci, monsieur. There was a statement yesterday from you on Libya where it's mentioned the House of Representatives fell short of the expected standards of transparency and procedures and included acts of intimidation prior to the session. My question, can we have more detail on that? And also, are these information from the UN SMIL? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, these are information that our colleagues on the ground feel is verified enough that they could express publicly. Celia.
Steph, you talked earlier about the Secretary General ready to offer his good offices in that conflict. Did you think at one point to go to Moscow and to meet in person with Vladimir Putin? And why he is not doing so?
Okay, first of all, I think the message of his good offices was passed on directly to the leadership, both in Ukraine and Russia, and he's been in contact with them. One doesn't, I don't think a Secretary General travels without being invited or with the assurances of being received. Stefano and then Philippe.
Thank you, Stephane. About Ukraine, maybe he said already, but I don't know if this question was asked. What the Secretary General thinks about the request by the Ukrainian to NATO and Europeans and Americans to have a no-fly zone over Ukraine. So what is his opinion about that? Then about the peace talks, I understand that you say that you want to know from us, but did the Secretary General suggest to the parts that maybe the UN can help actually during the talks?
As I mentioned, our good officers remain available, and everyone knows it. You're using the term peace talk. I'm not using that terminology. I just said no. But just to be clear, I did not refer to them as peace talks.
Sure.
I just refer them as talks,
yeah.
right? And we're of course, I was speaking a bit offhandedly. We of course have other sources to find out what's going on. But the point I was making, I think, to Ibtisam is that we do not have anybody there.
And so the question was about the no-fly zone?
I have no comment on that.
Okay, and then is a question about Libya. Well, there was already some questions, Johan said, but what do you know about news that came out that this morning? I mean, had this confirmed that two ministers of the so-called new government of Bashaga, they were kidnapped on a gunpoint?
I have no, I mean, I think I've heard about this. I don't have any confirmation. Yeah. Philippe.
Merci Stéphane de m'avoir attendu au début. C'est pas facile d'être à l'heure à ce briefing, surtout avec la porte 46 fermée. My question is this one. You have a success story at UN with the payment by Iraq to Kuwait for the destruction in Kuwait. Do you think once the conflict in Ukraine is over, do you think it's possible to use this kind of mechanism as a precedent for the conflict today?
I mean, it's a very valid question. I think it is indeed a success story. It was one that took a long time to conclude, at least my lifetime here at the UN, if not more. Whether it's, I'm not going to hypothesize whether it can be used in other places. I think for us, the important thing is let's get this conflict ended, and then we can figure out next steps. Okay. Do you mind if let me go to the screen a bit to those who've been waiting patiently online. James Reinl.
Thank you, Stephane. You've been asked a lot of questions today about humanitarian issues in Ukraine, and obviously the Security Council, some members are planning to put forward a resolution about humanitarian access. Are you able to comment on whether the Secretariat supports this initiative? And if you do, is there anything that you'd like to see in the document?
Look, the only thing I would say is that we always want to see and are strengthened in our action by a united voice from the Security Council. Obviously, the 15 members will have to negotiate and decide and move forward on a resolution, but I'm not going to go into the details of that. Chris, I think you have Chris Reyes.
Yeah. Hi, Stephane. Chris Reyes with CBC. First question is that yesterday, the Ukraine ambassador before the vote sort of challenged ambassadors to sign that blue charter and drop it off with the Secretary General. I'm wondering whether that actually happened and whether there's a visual to show that there's a stack of blue books at the Secretary General's office. Let's start with that, and then I have a second question.
I will check the delivery logs for you.
Okay. And the second question is, because there are recent reports that China asked Russia to delay the invasion until after the Olympics. I know the Secretary General was at the opening ceremony along with President Putin and Xi Jinping. Did he have an audience with them? And were there any discussions about de-escalating tensions even at that point?
On Beijing, he did not, he was present at the opening ceremonies where President Putin was as well. They were sitting in different places. Secretary General was with President Xi and the president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach. My understanding is that President Putin left right after and did not attend the dinner, the official dinner, so they did not see each other. And the discussions between the Secretary General and President Xi were focused on issues and files of interest between China and the UN. I do not believe the Ukraine issue came up in those discussions. Margaret Bashir.
I thought when you said it was UNEP's birthday, I thought you were going to say it's James Bayes' birthday.
Is it James Bayes' birthday? Is he only 50?
It is James Bayes' birthday. I won't say.
Yeah.
But
Right?
I won't say
50-ish?
older, UNEP or James.
Yeah. All right.
But in his honor, I will ask you a series of questions. First of all, on the UN convoys in Ukraine, you were saying that you've given locations and such to the Russians. Given the experience of the UN in Syria with the deconfliction problems, have there been any extra mechanisms set up or anything? Any special guarantees requested or anything in particular to guarantee the safety of people in Ukraine?
Well, we're obviously, I think as I mentioned, we've seen the announcement of the Russian Defense Ministry creating this interagency coordination center on humanitarian response in Ukraine. We will be in discussions with them about that. I mean, it is a fact that we do have an experience on deconfliction with parties in a conflict, both in Syria and, in fact, in Yemen as well, and a pretty extensive operation in Yemen. So we have that experience. And frankly, those sorts of mechanisms are critical for us to be able to operate in a conflict zone while minimizing risk as much as possible. Did you have another James-based question, or is that it?
And I do. I don't know. My phone is acting weird. Okay. And then how many human rights monitors are on the ground in Ukraine?
I have to get numbers for you. I don't know off the top of my head.
Do you know?
I do not know off the top of my head. We'll get you a
And
number.
IOM?
Yeah.
Okay. And the IOM, are they working to repatriate third country nationals who have crossed the borders to other European countries?
I don't believe they're doing that at this point. I will check with them, but I've not seen anything on that from IOM. But obviously, it is something they have the ability to do. Oscar?
Okay, and just one last
sorry.
one. One
Yeah.
last one in honor of James. Wait, one last one. Do you know the total number of UN agencies who are on the ground in Ukraine and on the border, states?
I will get you that number maybe before the end of this briefing, how many agencies we have. Okay, Oscar, and then we'll go back to the room.
Yes, Stephane, thank you. To follow up the conflict in Ukraine, Stephane, it seems like the conflict in Ukraine is like a chronicle of a death toll. We were talking about this before, and now that it happens, in counting the millions of refugees and the numbers of people dying in this conflict. And of course, Stephane, the diplomats' efforts to solve the conflict, but looks like it's going nowhere. So do you think, starting from here, can this lead to UN reform with this conflict that is a permanent member?
Oscar, you're asking very interesting questions that are really, sounds like a great prompt for meeting at the Council on Foreign Affairs. I'm not going to start speculating on where this will lead with UN reform. I'm not dismissing the issue you raise, but it's frankly, it's not something for me to get into right now. My focus right now is to talk about what we're doing on the ground.
Another second question, if you allow me, please, is about yesterday's appointment from the Secretary General of Mr. Leonardo Garnier of Costa Rica as a special advisor for the 2022 Transforming Education. I remember ideas in this regard, and what can do the UN to implement the climate change education, global education in schools? Like teachers can teach global warming, because this is about COVID-19, and their education and programs about COVID-19.
Listen, Oscar, we've discussed this before. You've raised this. I agree with you that education is a cornerstone of the fight against climate change, and I hope everyone has the same understanding. Let's go back to the room. Ibtisam, then Ray, then Philippe.
Just a quick follow-up on what I asked you before. So you said that Mr. Amin Awad is a coordinator, crisis coordinator for Ukraine, and rather a humanitarian. So my question is, why or what does it take for the Secretary General to appoint an envoy and is it his own decision, or is it something that he needs to coordinate with the Security Council?
Yeah, so that's why I guess the words matter. It is, I think, as a general rule for envoys, special representatives, it is important for him to have the backing of a legislative organ of the UN. This is really about helping the country team shift, right? I mean, a few weeks ago, the Ukraine the UN's program in Ukraine were focused on humanitarian needs in the East, on development issues. It was much more of a traditional program. Things have shifted almost overnight. Things are going to get a lot more important for the UN. I mean, you saw the amount of money that we asked for, the amount of money that we got. I think it is very important to have someone as a coordinator to just ensure the smooth sailing of the program. I would also add that our resident coordinator, humanitarian coordinator, Osnat Lubrani, has been doing an amazing job managing the country team, but this has gone to a kind of a different level.
Is he considering appointing an envoy?
At this point, our focus right now is on the humanitarian end. Ray, then Philippe.
Stephane, it looks like there is a breaking news according to Reuters. Yeah, okay. According to Ukrainian negotiators, there is an agreement that includes a possible ceasefire during the evacuations, and the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, reach an understanding on establishing joint humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians. Any comment on that?
I think I need to take a look. Obviously, any positive movement that would help with the protection of civilians and lower the intensity of the conflict, we would welcome. But I will try to have something a bit more formal afterwards. AFP. Go ahead, Philippe.
Sorry, AFP again. Same question. Do you see any role for UN to protect this humanitarian corridor?
Yeah, I mean,
and
sorry,
also a little to be sure. When you say 10 million, it's 4 million refugee, 6 million displaced people.
Okay.
Correct?
What I said, and this is a projection, right? I said this could lead to 10 million people on the move. Let me go back and say exactly what I said is that our humanitarian colleagues warn that while the scale and scope of displacement is not yet clear, we expect that more than 10 million people may flee their homes if violence continues, including 4 million who may cross borders to neighboring countries. This is in addition to the 1 million who's already crossed the border.
Okay, so it would be 5 million refugee and 6 million displaced person?
Internally displaced, yes.
Internally displaced.
You and I do this simple math correctly.
Okay, and so on the corridor and the possible
well, of course, I mean,
of UN?
on the and again, I need to see what the agreement says, but obviously we would clearly be implicated in the exploitation of humanitarian corridors.
And last question. There is a discussion since Sunday on a resolution at the Security Council on the humanitarian aspect. Are you disappointed? We didn't see anything from the Security Council since Sunday. We expected the France announced before it would be on Tuesday, the adoption or the vote, and there is nothing, and we don't see any smoke.
Look, I think what we've learned is to have patience when it comes to Security Council deliberations.
But even for humanitarian?
Benno.
Apologies, but let me triple check that. So it means 11 million all in all, right? Because I just
I understand.
Change
This is a projection. Right?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, this is a projection.
Sure.
We have to see how, I would need to check how many are already internally displaced, and then we can come up with a big number. Edward.
Sorry, there's another question. On Thursday, Ukraine's parliament called for the United Nations and other international organizations to send a peacekeeping mission.
So who did?
The Ukraine's parliament.
Yeah.
So what would be the response?
I think Secretary General addressed that there are procedures for setting up peacekeeping operations, and that's up to the Security Council to decide. Okay, if you have any questions left, I would ask you to address them to Paulina Kubiak, who will be happy to answer them, because I don't have any answers left.